Hello, this is Don,
And this is Gina with Focused Healthy Family.
and this week we're sharing with you some of the best of 2023 from the Focused Healthy Family podcast.
Each day this week, we'll rebroadcast one of our favorite episodes over this past year. So be sure to tune in every day.
And also join us in 2024.
So have a happy holidays, and we'll see you in the new year.
So at my mom's wake, she passed away about a month ago. The first story I told in her eulogy was that when I was in 7th grade, she was a teacher at the middle school across town, not the one I went to, but the other middle school. And every time people would meet me and find out my last name was Kasani and that my mom was, my mom, they would tell me that she was their absolute favorite teacher and the kindest person that they had ever met. So when I was in 8th grade and we had a basketball game against the competing school where my mom taught, I made myself a sweatshirt that had my name on the back of it. It said Kasani, because I wanted people to know that she was my mom and that I had so many people come up to me after the game or during the game and say, "Oh, Judy Kasani is your mom. She's my favorite. She's my favorite." And it was such a beautiful experience of recognizing that my mom had made an impact on all these people and that I was using it for my own benefit. But I told her all about it and she loved it. And my mom's experience in life, if I had to, talk about who she is she was just kind to everybody. She was a kind teacher. She was a kind mother. She was kind to her parents, her sister, the world. And when my dad got sick at 60 years old, they had big plans. They had just retired, and she ended up dedicating her life to caring for him. He needed a lot of care. And one of the things that my mom never lost, even in the midst of all of that challenge, because it did alter the trajectory of her life, all of our lives, was she laughed all the time. So one of the things I love to hear in my own mind when I need it is my mom laughing, even about things that were difficult, not laughing at it, but with it, just realizing that that sometimes things are so difficult that it's absurd. And so we all need a little bit of release, and it's connective, and it, takes some air out of the balloon. And I'm very grateful that I learned that how to use humor in adversity. And I learned that through my mom.
Well, hello, this is Gina.
And this is Don.
With Focused Healthy Family. And this is podcast number 52. And we're stepping back into the concept of the sandwich generation. Today, we have the honor of talking with Cathy Adams from Zen Parenting Radio about the sandwich generation and her experience caring for her mother. But before we get into that, let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Hey guys, it's Don here from Focused Healthy Family. And instead of our sponsor today, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the workshop we're doing based on this book. And we talk a lot about the book. We've talked about it in our podcast, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Adele Faber and Elaine Majlis. And what we were so impressed with this that we decided to do the training, the training for it, and begin doing workshops for it. We've been doing them now over the last couple of years and have just been amazed by the changes that we have seen happen to parents who are dealing with kids and watching it changing how they communicate with their child, but also how it changes behavior and it changes anxiety. It brings anxiety down in the house. And like I said, I've had an added bonus to it is I use the same material, the same stuff that's in here for my adult world with my profession, because the concepts in this book, they give you real practical steps you can take to change how you communicate and make a difference between having a 15-minute conversation or a 1-hour battle. They tell you in here how to do that in many different ways. And so we do workshops. It's a 6-week workshop, It's a 2 hour a day workshop, but what we did is we split it into 2 days, 1 hour each day. We do it at noon Eastern time. And we have had people all over the world that have come onto the class, and really neat stuff. And I'm going to play for you uh, one of the parents' testimonies on what they thought of the class. So listen and see what they said. So, starting January 9th, 2024, we're doing our next series of 6-week classes, and they're at noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, each week for 6 weeks. And you're going to gain a lot of different skills that are very important. Plus, you'll have the opportunity to have other parents and listen to how they deal with things and what's going on for them, and literally working through examples, role playing, um, learning some good content to the book, and just having a good time too. At the same time, we have a lot of fun while we do them. I hope that you can join us for this workshop. Again, it's all virtual via Zoom, and it's 6 weeks starting January 9th. You can find out more information by going to focusedhealthyfamily.com/workshops, where you're going to find out all about this wonderful workshop on how to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk. Hope you join us again. focusedhealthyfamily.com/workshops. Thanks.
And we're back. And today we get to talk to Cathy Adams. She is a self-awareness expert, podcast host. She's the author of Zen Parenting, Caring for Ourselves and Our Children in an Unpredictable World, along with other published books. She focuses on parenting and the personal empowerment of women and young girls. She's a licensed clinical social worker, a certified parent coach, a certified elementary school teacher, certified yoga teacher, and she teaches at the sociology department at Dominican University and Elmhurst College. Welcome, Cathy. I am so glad you're here, and I so enjoyed the story you shared about your experience with your mom.
Thank you for inviting me. I love the topic that we're going to be covering today. I love what your podcast is all about. So thank you.
Well, you get started.
So we listened to your podcast. We've been listening for a while. And when you talked about your mother's passing and helping her navigate with her dementia, I believe you said she had Lewy body dementia, and that hits real close to home. My father has Parkinson's, and his dementia has kind of snowballed since COVID started, and he's just recently out of the hospital, and juggling that along with raising our kids, and just how you talked about navigating that, and just love to kind of delve into that more. And in particular, you know, the most recent podcast I've listened to by you is talking about the principles of Zen parenting, and just how you're able to incorporate that into helping care for your mother, juggling, communicating with other family members, other people involved in her care, and with your girls.
Yeah.
That was a big question.
Yeah, I can do it. I can do it, Don. I can do it. I can cover all these topics best I can. So I'll back up a little and say, I was just sharing with both of you off air before we started, is that I really don't know what it's like to be an adult without caring for one of my parents. My dad had a heart attack and stroke when I was 27 years old, before I had kids. And they told us he wasn't going to make it, actually. But somehow he did. And he ended up having to go through rehabilitation and learn how to speak again. And he still struggled with aphasia his whole life after that. But, you know, really basically was chronically ill for the next 17 years of his life. The fact that he lived that long, I think they told us when he left that it would be maybe 5. So my dad's kind of a miracle. But he, you know, my sister and my mom and I helped care for my dad, even though he wouldn't have put it that way. He was one of those people who was like, I'm 100%, I'm great, I don't need anything. He's my dad was a beautiful, I always said he had beautiful denial, because he was never angry. He was never mad at us, but he didn't agree with us. He knew that we were doing everything in his best interest. But then the other thing he would do is he obviously was in the hospital a lot, in and out of the hospital. And every hospital he was at, even if it was a new one, he'd say, I have the best nurses, the best doctors work here. He was just an optimist, but I always understood there was denial in that optimism, but it allowed him to thrive. I mean, 17 years, right? After getting sick. So my dad passed away in 2017. And a few years, it wasn't even a full year, maybe 6 months after my dad died, my mom started to demonstrate some different behaviors. My sister and I, the way we described it is she was kind of goofy. Like she would be kind of silly and say kind of strange things, not necessarily inappropriate, but it was different. We initially blamed it on grief. We thought my mom's grieving, my sister and I were grieving in different ways. So we just thought, well, it's grief. But then she one day said, I'm having a hard time writing a check. I don't know where to sign my name. And we were like, okay. So we did all the neurological testing. As you said, my mom was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, which, in your experience, you were saying it had Parkinsonian features. Not only did she have the dementia, but she had the shaking and those challenges that go along with it. So my sister and I then cared for my mom from that year until my mom passed away. Like I said, in the end of January, I think it was. It's hard to. It feels like 2 weeks ago and 2 years ago. And so what I will say about that is I have been caring for my parents since even before I had kids, and I had children in the midst of it. And I didn't find a ton of difference between the universal principles that we were talking about on Zen Parenting, which I can get into in a second, and how I applied them with my kids and my parents, because really all they are, what we talk about is self-awareness, compassion, connection, and mindfulness. Those are kind of the pillars that we move in and out of on our show. I don't think there's anything we've talked about that we haven't somehow brought it back to those things. And when you are a caregiver, those things are essential, because you have to understand your own energy, where you're coming from, your history. You have to be with that person in present time, especially someone who's dealing with dementia, which is a mindfulness tool. You have to focus on, rather than, rehashing the past in a certain moment or figuring out what's going to happen tomorrow, you're focusing on connection with them in the moment. And then compassion, not just for them, because that's a big part of being a caregiver, but also for yourself. I really, I'm just now reflecting on my adult life and how different it was than my peers. And I didn't even really talk about it that much. I never hid it, but they're just now having experiences of their parents getting sick or falling or just getting bad blood work back that concerns them. And I thought, geez, I have been going to hospitals and surgeries and diagnoses since like I said, 27, I felt like a kid. I'm 51 now. Yeah. So I would say all these things that Todd and I talk about on the show, as far as Zen parenting and all those principles I just shared with you about how to relate to our kids. I used them and continue to use them with the outside world, but definitely in regards to the relationship with my parents. Because the thing about, it was I had great relationships with my parents, but they weren't perfect. There were things in our history that may have been challenging that I hadn't been able to talk about. Even my dad's beautiful, optimistic denial was difficult when he was dying. You can't talk about dying when someone's in denial that they're dying. So these are things that I have had to work on in my own therapy, in my own, self-awareness work, to make sure that I could be a parent, a caregiver, and also an individual in my own right. I'm a social worker, so I know how easy it is to get burned out. And so there was a lot of foundational elements that I had to put in place to even be able to do parenting and caregiving. Sandwich generation is such a great word, when I really started to learn about being a member of this community with the two of you, is that we really are just balancing plates on both sides all the time. We really are between figuring out how to manage our past and look toward our future at all times. So it's a great question.
Well, I recently saw a cartoon there, and there was a couple on top of this mound, and they had ropes tied to them. And on one side, there were kids pulling them. On the other side, there was an older couple pulling on the other side, and and in the middle, they were kind of like almost ready to explode,
Yes.
So I'm kind of curious. You talk about going to the hospital a lot, and in this last what, 3 weeks, I guess. You've bounced back between, because we had our youngest was in a behavioral health center in the hospital
I
for
spent like almost the whole month going to
back
some
and forth,
hospital.
I was kind of curious, you touched on it, I think, but how did you cope through that? Because my youngest one asked me one day out of, how are you coping with this, Dad? And I didn't know how to answer him, because I'm just doing it because there was no other choice to do it, to be there and take care of and all that. I was just curious what kind of elements you put in place to help you cope.
Yeah, a lot of different things. Again, because I've been doing this for so long, and I would even back up to say that, as I said, a lot of this I had my first child at 30. So that was, when I really became a member of this, generation where I was helping my mom and dad, and then I had a baby. And that was really the beginning of my self-awareness journey, where I was already into self-help. I mean, I have been since I was 16, to be honest with you. I've never not been into it, but I really started to dive into, instead of just talking about it, I really started to be like, okay, who am I? And what I recognized through that process, and I'm, going to summarize decades of work, but is what it means to care for myself. What I know that I need is to talk. I'm an external processor. It's part of the reason I'm a podcaster. Todd is not an external podcaster or an external processor, but he knows I am. So I need to discuss these things. I am a therapist, but I also go to therapy. I'm a big believer in having someone to process with. I am a member of a women's group where I talk with other women who are having similar experiences. I'm very open with my sister, who she and I share responsibility. And I just could not ask for a better partner in taking care of my parents. We did it together. She had skills, I had skills. And then really basic things like I get sleep, I go to bed. I do yoga. I'm a yoga teacher. I know how to breathe. And I mean that not just like, oh, take a deep breath, but I really know how to calm down my system, because I have a tendency to be anxious. That's just part of me and my childhood and just who I am. It's like, where does it begin? Right. And, so I'm very aware of that. I'm a journaler. I'm a writer. Like, self-care to me is not hey, what should I do today? It's kind of how I survive. I mean, the first 3 things I do in the morning, are all about self-care. They're all about me first. And it was more difficult when my kids were little, I have to be honest, because sometimes they were in bed with me or waking me up and I couldn't focus on myself first. But then I had to build it in later in the day, or I had to stay up an hour later. Like I don't, some of my friends who are, like I do meditation, and some of my friends are like, don't you just want to stop having that kind of schedule? And I'm like, well, but I know what the outcome is then. Like, I've learned this. If I don't stretch or do yoga or breathe, it's going to go sideways. So right. It's just a dedication to myself. It's like, the word I use in my book is a devotion to myself.
Okay.
Because I know my work is my parents, my children, my clients. We are all in this profession of giving to people.
Yes.
So how do you do that if you are not like giving to yourself, devoted to yourself? Because people count on me,
right.
And so me taking care of myself, I can't stand when people call any of those things selfish, but no, there's nothing selfish about it. People count on me.
Right.
I have to show up. So that's, it's over the years, it's not even self-care anymore. It's just survival. It's how I live.
Yeah.
Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're no good for anybody else. I
talk about it. It's selfish with a capital S.
Yeah.
It's what we're supposed to take care of ourselves first.
Absolutely.
In order to be able to take care of anybody. I'm sorry. Did I interrupt?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I suffer with depression, and it's very situational. When I look back over the years, it doesn't follow a particular time pattern or, time of year. And like you said, working as an occupational therapist, I'm a caregiver with my kids. I'm a caregiver. Don went through heart disease himself. He had a heart attack and open heart surgery, and caring for him. And now with my parents, and I realize how draining it is when I'm not doing those things. And I've seen, me at my worst when
I have two.
Mm-hmm. We see
Sorry.
each other. Mm-hmm.
And knowing the other side of it when I'm not following through on those things. And like you said, it's survival. It's, I'm a writer too. I write and I journal and I have a blog, and I do it like for myself. And it's
Yeah.
like, if one person reads this and they gain something from it, that's wonderful. And it's how I process things. And when I'm not doing that, I'm not functioning as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Well, and another word that is always helpful to me is that's my responsibility to take care of myself. Like I used to have this program that I ran for 5th grade girls, and I loved it. And my first, the first thing we'd always open it with is, what is your number one responsibility? And the first times we'd meet, they'd say things like walking my dog or doing my homework. And then by the 6th week of being together, they'd say me. My most important responsibility is me, because that paradigm shift for children, when they think that everything is about giving away, or focusing on their peers, is that shift back into themselves. And again, parents fear this because they think it'll teach their child to be, egocentric or even more have the world revolve around them. But it's the opposite. If a kid knows they're vital and they're important, they don't need all that outward, it's like an intrinsic motivator. They don't need the external world telling them they're okay, because they're doing that themselves. Right. Like narcissism is not somebody who's practicing self-care. That's a need for everyone else to tell them they're great. And, self-care or understanding you are your own responsibility, you don't need it. We all need a little, but you don't need it as much. You don't need it as desperately, because you love yourself in a way that other people may not be able to understand.
Yeah. And it's so important in so many areas. Our middle child is living on her own now. And we had to talk to her about balancing work and life and speaking up for herself at work. And it's a little tricky. She works for her aunt, my sister, and letting her express what her needs are and wanting to empower her with that, because she's a people pleaser and she wants to do it all right. And she doesn't want to offend anybody. And someone actually said something to her about, well, all you're thinking about is yourself. And I told her, that's okay, because nobody else is going to just think about you. You have to take care of yourself. And part of me realized, I want her to gain all the knowledge that I've had in my 53 years. And part of me has to step back and say, okay, she's got to live her own path. Some of this confidence I have has come about from life experience. And at 21, you're not going to have all that. But
no, and that's like the messiness of raising humans is, I think it's really interesting to, I've been working with parents, like I said, for, 20 years, and that they're, if our kid is 5, 10, 15, 20, there's this belief of like, why would they do that? Or how would they make this mistake? And I can't believe they made that choice. I'm like, this is the messiness of humans. Like they don't know yet. We wear these adult glasses, the question, asking children things like, why would you do that? Or who do you think you are? They don't know. I don't know why I do these things. And our job is not to have them lead this. There's no way that we could, this linear path of all these successes. The reason we're around is so when they fall or fail or get hurt or are challenged, that's when we get to support and encourage and help them get back up. I find when they're like kind of on their own path, I'd like stand back a little bit, like they're flying but I'm not thinking that's it. I mean, my kids are 19, 18, and 14, and that sounds old, meaning like we've gotten them through a lot of stages of life. Yes. But my 19-year-old called me this morning and needed support. It never ends.
Yes.
Well, I get a kick. I have a coaching practice. I'm an EFT tapping practitioner, and I have a practice, and I work a lot with parents, and they come in, and a lot of times I get this, oh my gosh, I'm messing up so much. I'm screwing my kids up, by all the mistakes I made, my past life, all of that stuff. And I really try to work with them and thinking more about it as these mistakes are lessons.
Yeah.
That by if you've made it through it and you've made amends or whatever to come out of that mistake or that problem, you've given them a beautiful lesson on how they're going to do it someday when maybe they're going to get that same situation. And how do they get through it? They can get through it by knowing, well, one, that it sucks, but that mom made it through it or dad made it through it. And this is what they did. I can do it too. And it gives them that confidence by experience.
Yeah. And trusting that there's no other way to get through life, like the belief that our kids will have some certain path or be successful in this like cultural way of talking about success or societal expectations of, certain job or marriage or children or whatever. Even if they had all those things, they're still going to struggle in some way and that's not something that any human should avoid. I mean, because that's, I'm thinking about my greatest struggles. A lot of them weren't even things that I necessarily contributed to. Life just happens. And I'm not saying I was like not to blame at all. What I mean is like, they weren't things I expected to happen. Let me say it that way. I may have played a role in it, but the things I feared the most, those things didn't happen. It was these things that I had no idea were going to happen. And so we can't, I think my goal, especially with where I am now, is recognizing, to your point, Don, is that when things happen, because they will, not only do I have the ability to learn from them, but sometimes it puts me then in a different path or an opening or an experience I would have never had, or people I met that I would have never known. And everything, even the hardest things are, they're leading us somewhere. And I'm just kind of trusting the big process. Now, what I say to clients though, and I'm sure the two of you do too, is right when a crisis hits, I'm not going to put a silver lining around it. This is, let's just stay here and do this. Those kind of commentaries, like what you and I were just sharing, that's for later. That's for, do you notice how the days are getting a little better and we're getting stronger? Because I don't like spiritual bypassing. I think we really need to kind of, when we're in pain, it's okay to be in pain. We don't have to jump to the next thing too fast. That's just part of, if we can handle that, then we're not as afraid of it,
Right. Yeah. The only way the other side is going through it.
You got to go through it. Yeah. You got to
get through the muck and the mud. And so thinking about these topics, as we're talking about kids, I'm finding it very different. My mom is in great health, yet I see the stress and strain on her and caring for my dad. And so it's very different helping my mom versus helping my kids. I raised my kids. I know where they're coming from. We have this very close connection. And my mother and I are close to some extent, but don't have a super deep relationship. We don't talk every week or anything. Lately we are, but and so just having to understand her and where she's coming from and her generation and how she was raised and what she's able to handle and process, and helping her navigate this process alongside dealing with my dad and and the ever expansive and unpredictable world of dementia.
So is there a question behind that?
I can rip off of that because I so know what you're saying. And I feel like this, again, another thing that we talk about a lot with Zen parenting or relating to our kids. I'm just using the word Zen parenting because that's what I write about. And just for clarification for people listening, Zen, I'm using the word not in the practice of actually being like a Zen Buddhist or like being a practitioner of Zen. I use the definition of Zen to mean like everything changes, everything's connected, and pay attention. That's like the best description. That's like the mainstream way of understanding what Zen is, and that everything's a paradox. Everything's light and dark. Like Zen, I feel, has all these principles that if we could make them more mainstream, I think we'd understand life better. And there are people that practice it on a daily basis in a more religious, cultural way. And I'm always here to say that is a completely different thing. I'm trying to use it, like take the beauty of it and try and understand it in a day-to-day experience, just like I do with yoga. And, how do we pull the best out of it rather than not even look at it, right? And so I think when it comes to this idea of pay attention or, everything changes. It's like with my mom, I'll just focus on my mom since you're focusing on your mom. I also had to care for her while she was caring for my dad. And I got to know her a lot better then. And I don't mean better like we went to more lunches and bonded more. I mean, like I saw my mom through a much more human lens of like what she dealt with, who she is, what her, you know, as you said, societal expectations were when she was growing up, her cultural boundaries around what's right and wrong to her because of being, she was actually silent generation. She wasn't even boomer. She was 82 when she died. So she was like right at the end of that silent generation.
Right.
There were just things that were going to be a certain way, and I was not going to change them, nor did I need to. There's like an acceptance of this is who my mom is. These are her limitations. These are her expansive parts. And I didn't go, a lot of times we go into a conversation with a parent and we know exactly what they think and how they're going to react, but then we get kind of pissed that they reacted that way. But that's what they're going to do. Like, we know what they're going to do. So instead of being like, wow, can you believe they did that? Yeah, I can. Because that's what they do. And it's very similar to being with kids where it's like, you have 3 kids. So do I. All my kids are very different. So they have different reactions to things, different experiences. And I don't try and parent my oldest the way I parent my youngest. And same with my parents, my dad and my dad had physical limitations and a completely clear mind. So that had its own difficulty of watching him suffer physically. My mom had no physical limitations and her mind was not clear. And that was even before dementia. She was dealing with anxiety. She was dealing with caregiving. It wasn't just, it's not all dementia. Some of it is like their own mental health. And I knew I did try sometimes to like offer my mom new ways to see things. And sometimes she was open to it, but I also knew when she was done. And that we should call it a day, this is as much as we can do today. And I love you, Mom, from this place, and I had to do my own work about what I didn't get as a child or what I felt like she should respond. I didn't need my mom to offer me apologies or explanations to things because really, as you said, Gina, when you look at it, it makes sense why they did what they did, right?
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't great.
Well, I'm just kind of curious. And when you talked about seeing your mom from a different lens, a couple of things. I'm wondering about your kids and their lenses to you, but also to your mom.
Yes.
Did it, how did that, did that change because of what you were going through? How they even saw you, and did they learn from, kind of learn from that?
They did. I think my girls have had a very unique experience because they started with they never knew my dad. They knew their grandfather. So by the time they met my dad, he was grandpa and he had already had a stroke and he was different. He was, like I said, he was all of his mental capacities, he just couldn't express them. So he had different language. He didn't have all the words, for those who don't know, aphasia is basically where you know what you want to say, but you can't retrieve the word. And it's very common with dementia. For my dad, it was for a stroke, because he had a stroke on the left side of his brain. So my girls grew up with a grandfather who spoke kind of funny and who also had a cane and who was in the hospital for a long time. And they knew their mom would get pulled away. But I believe that if you were to ask them if they were here, I think it grew their compassion and respect for the elderly. We went to a lot of, my parents ended up in a assisted living place. And so my girls have been surrounded by the elderly since they were little. And they don't fear, they are not uncomfortable with elderly people. They would help my dad. They'd open doors, they'd grab his cane. They would, and then with my mom, again, she ended up in assisted living or a more memory care kind of situation, but we were there all the time. So my girls even learned how to interact with a person with dementia, which is just follow their lead.
Right.
Whatever they're saying, you just go with it. And, you're like, if they say they need a new car and they're ready to drive to California, you're like, that sounds lovely. You just go with it.
That's your dad with his Corvette.
We've had quite an adventure with driving and my father, and he reached the stage of dementia where he's not in denial, but he's unaware of his limitations. I had to take him to fail a driver's assessment because I knew he wasn't safe to drive. But in his mind, he was buying a brand new Corvette. And I had to be like, okay, Dad, what's the plan B if you don't pass? And Yeah, it's been an interesting juggling act when you bring up driving,
Yes.
because he kind of jumps right back into that as soon as anybody brings up cars and stuff. But
Well, and you're kind of grateful to the state for that reason, because I
Yeah.
also had to take my mom to fail 2 driver's tests. Like, and I say 2 because the first one, the guy was kind of a jerk, and she's like, I want to try again. I'm like, absolutely. So we went to a different location, and we started, and she didn't pass the vision test.
okay.
So we couldn't even get to the next place. And so my mom was finally like, okay, like I didn't have to do it. The
Yeah.
state did
Yeah.
it. And then we were like, I could be her support system rather than her person yanking away. And not everybody gets that luxury. A lot of people have to make that decision for their parents.
You had a doctor that kind of, or not, it was somebody that came back and kind of gave him a little bit of hope that he might be able to do it again, which was like, oh, what did you do that? You know?
Because
Yeah.
when they moved up from further in South Carolina to where they live now, closer to us, and he had Parkinson's and he was having double vision. And I actually, being an occupational therapist, I had him go to an outpatient OT center and had an OT assess him for all the visual perceptual skills and the reaction time and all those things that go into driving. And he
Yeah.
passed that time. That was about 8-9 years ago. So I had to take him back to the same place about a year ago.
Well, there was a time he and I were driving together. I think this was the time they were moving up here, and he and I were driving down, I think, to get a van back down to the lake. And we're driving down this little 2-lane road, and I'm driving along, and I hear him going 1 1 2 2 2 1 1, and he kept doing it every time a car would pass or something would pass us. And finally, I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, well, the car comes at me as 1, and then it splits off into 2 and comes back together as 1. I was like, well, I'm glad I'm driving then, you know.
Yeah, the brain, it changes. And that's the thing, is like, it makes, again, I'm talking about it making, I know dementia doesn't always make sense. And even an aging brain, you know, we look at it and we're like, oh, they're just really struggling, but really they're utilizing new ways of understanding the world.
Yeah.
Like, that's such an interesting perspective of, he's like 1 2, like that's something my dad would have done too, is he would have explained, because and he may have understood it the way I did, but he couldn't express it. So
Right.
he would say it in a way, like my sister and my mom and I became whizzes. Like anybody else would be like, what did he just say? I'm like, oh, he said blah, 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 blah. Like
Right.
I started to learn the way his brain processed things. And
Right.
that's, you know, and when we're tired, you know, going back to self-care, when we're tired or scared because we're in the car with them, or frustrated, it's hard to be compassionate. It's just annoying. I mean, let's just be honest. Like, we're just like, this is annoying and I'm exhausted. But when we are, again, if we're full enough, you know, if we have enough energy, they are absolutely intriguing. And it's like learning about a new way of viewing the whole world, you know, of how you manage life, how you talk to people, how you use words to explain something when you don't have access to words. Like, they are fascinating. But when we're in a hurry, when we're tired, they're just,
Right.
it's just energy drain. So
Sure.
again, going back to your first question, that's another reason, because can we stay more curious about them rather than annoyed by them? That's
just like with kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
To speak to what you said, as far as seeing your mom through a new lens, my dad went in the hospital
2 weeks
whenever it
ago.
was, 2 weeks ago or something. And so I was going down there to be there with her. And it really did kind of shift the relationship a little bit, and seeing things from her perspective and kind of joining her where she's at, just like with kids, you know, as they grow developmentally, they're changing. And it was kind of a nice opportunity to connect with her on a different level. My mom's 79, my dad's 81. So they're kind of at that cusp of baby boomer silent generation. And just seeing how she is dealing with things, and some things I didn't like about her personality. I'm like, well, it's serving her right now. She doesn't take things too personally. She's a little more emotionally removed, but it's helpful when my dad's cursing her out or, you know, mad at her because whatever she did to him.
I think she wants a divorce.
His mom, he's really wrapped up on this.
Every time she left the hospital, he thought she's well, and I think he even thought she was seeing somebody, you know. So
there's this whole delusion that he can get wrapped around, and that she's able to kind of laugh about it and kind of stay removed from it, and just how that's serving her now. And it has been an interesting experience, and kind of joining her in her own process of where she's at in life. And it's a change though. And I can only imagine the change for her in going from, a partner, a husband, to someone she's caring for, and very different, looking at their relationship and how different that must feel for her.
Yeah. One of the things that is, I'm very aware of now, especially that both of my parents have passed, is that my parents had a full and big life before I even came around.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we look at our parents, we view it through the lens of how they affect us. Like, I wish they would act different or say something different or not do this, not talk to each other this way or whatever. And our parents have the defenses and way of managing their emotions or way of experiencing life for reasons that may have nothing to do with us at all.
Right.
They may have occurred before we came along. And now that, and again, I get spiritual about this, but I feel like when my parents now being gone, I have a different relationship with them. It's like, I see them in a much bigger, full way. And I think about how their day-to-day experiences weren't just thinking about me. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
they had to manage their own relationship, their own work, their own dreams, or their illnesses or their fear. And I just have even more compassion. And again, in the moment, like I have not forgotten the in the moment frustration and annoyance and energy drain. I have not forgotten that. I don't have a pie in the sky view on this, but there are some things like, just to share with you, like, there's some stories from my childhood or stories from my mom's childhood that I just forgot to ask about. And now my parents are gone and all those stories are gone forever.
Yeah.
And it's one thing as your mom is still, when you're with her, if you're like, oh, this is kind of not going anywhere, or you're finding yourself annoyed, like, just saying, like, my mom loved being on the farm with her grandparents. And I wish I would have asked more, like, what animals were there, or why did you enjoy the farm so much? Or what did grandma give you? What did your grandma give you that your mom didn't? And I think everybody loves to talk about themselves. And I feel like no matter where your mom is emotionally, I feel like she would love, and I don't know her.
Right.
But I think she'd probably enjoy those stories. And you, once she's not here, hopefully that'll be a long time from now, but you'll be like, I have those now.
Yeah.
I thought about interviewing them and recording.
Yes.
That's a good point, because my dad will go back into stories, and even before his dementia progressed to where it is now, he was real good with telling stories from the past. He couldn't remember what's going on now, but his long-term memory was good. And we went on a car trip together to a cousin's wedding, and he just told me all kinds of stories, and it was just neat that he's able to share in that. So I love that, because as I spend time with my mom, and just being able to just let her be heard, because I realized, she's got a lot on her plate, and she's been his caregiver continuously now, and just seeing how that's draining her, and wanting to kind of fill up her cup, just like we do for our kids, wanting to support them.
Well, I was wondering, Cathy, my dad passed away when I was 17, so that was a long time ago. And then my mom passed away in 2006, I think it was.
6.
And I had this really weird experience of, and I called it, I'm an orphan now, but there was this, and I've seen it in other people, where I think we have as a child of a parent, this idea of always have this fallback. We have, no matter what happens, we have our parents to fall back on.
Yep. And
when they were both gone, it was a weird kind of empty feeling of, I don't have that anymore. Now it's me. Like I said, I called it the orphan effect or whatever. I didn't know if you went through any of that or felt any of that.
I did. I think I can compare it. I think my biggest memory is when my dad went into the hospital the first time, and they told us he wasn't going to make it. I remember saying to my boyfriend, who is now my husband, but my boyfriend had brought me to the hospital to see my dad that day. And I remember saying to him, do you know a lot about finances? Because my dad always helped me with my finances. And I literally, that was in my grief. I was already thinking about all the things I was not going to have help, with, and, and he didn't end up passing that day. But I just remember being like, wow, what do I depend on my parents for? And I think the thing in my situation is everything was so gradual with my parents that by the time they did die, I had the roles had been so reversed that I can still go into grief of losing my father of my childhood or my mother of my teenage years, but the parent-child role had switched significantly. So, but I will say my sister-in-law, my husband's mom passed away in 2014 or 2015, and it was sudden. She was here. She was actually staying at our house. And then on a Thursday, Todd took her into the hospital and she never came out. She died on Saturday.
Wow.
She had lung cancer and didn't know it and was already shutting down.
Oh, wow.
It was such a shock to all of us and to my girls, and because someone's here and then they're not. And I feel like I don't have any comparison. I would never say, oh, one way is easier than the other, losing your parents over a long period of time versus short, because they're difficult for different reasons.
Yeah.
But I think that orphan effect that you're talking about, Don, I feel like that can hit you. That piece of grief is harder if it's surprised, like if someone has died by accident or, a quick illness or some where they're here and then they're gone, because you never got that change in roles. They're still you're a kid.
Yeah. Well, yeah, my dad was like, because he was sick for a year, but we didn't know it would happen. It went within a week.
Yes.
He went in the hospital for open heart surgery.
Well, it was really weird though, as he was leaving, he told my mom, he says, I don't think I'm coming back.
Yeah.
That was really weird. And my mom thing kind of went for I'd say about a year and a half. Once we found out she had dementia and stuff, it was fairly quick. It wasn't too much of a drag out.
She moved into an assisted living, and then she had a heart attack, and then she had to go to a nursing home. So there was a little bit of an understanding that was coming, and she was much older, than what your father was. But just those changes.
Yes. They were so abrupt.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know, just any thoughts you would give to somebody that was in this place that we're at, that, any, I don't know if I say advice or thoughts that might help them.
Yeah. I would say, because we've already really, hammered the point of taking care of yourself, which I know the two of you are, doing the best you can. Some days are better than others as far as where your energy is. But I would also say to really, I use the word grace, I use the word gentle, to really understand that what you're doing is difficult, and not to then say, not to fall apart about it, but to give yourself that grace that you're doing probably the most difficult job, which is for those of us, whose parents have been diagnosed with something and we know it's terminal, or that, you're walking someone home, you're helping somebody die in a way that, where you can feel that they knew they were loved, and that you felt like you gave them what you needed, and that, that you're developing a connection. Because this is the thing about death, is we get very focused on that last day or that last moment, and was everyone around them, and were we holding their hand, and was the right song playing? That's a moment. It's just kind of like, it's like birth and pregnancy. The birth is important, and it's a moment, but the whole process of allowing someone to get to a place where they can let go, or that it's time, or that everybody allows them to go. And you don't have to be prepared for all of that today. But those were the things I always thought about with my parents, is this is a really sacred job that I have here. And even though my dad, I did it for 17 years, it wasn't immediate. I knew my dad was chronically ill. I knew that we were, at the tail end of our relationship, and with my mom for sure, because, the stats with dementia are, a certain number of years after diagnosis, and it doesn't always end up being that way, but we know what we're doing. And so I would just say that understanding what an important role we have, and that we're not going to do it perfectly. We're going to have days where we're like, oh, I could have handled that better. I could have said the different thing. I could have not gotten frustrated, or I struggled with, should I show up today again? Should I call again? I always had a hard time leaving. I should have done more, but I really understood I also needed boundaries to as we said before, to then have energy for my husband, my children.
Mhm.
And my parents, even though my mom in dementia didn't always know that, like she would be like, why are you leaving? Or when are you coming back? But I also understood one of the beauties, one of the only beautiful things of dementia is the time. They don't understand time space continuum anymore. So sometimes I'd be there all day and she'd be like, you didn't show up. I'm like, I was there all day. So I stopped getting too wrapped up in the words she said to me because I understood.
Right. Right.
But I guess the basics, the words, self-care, compassion for yourself and the person in front of you, just be there in that moment. Even though, you're walking them home, you're like, let's just do today. Let's just do
Mhm.
today.
Yeah.
I say that with my kids too. Let's just do today.
Mhm.
But with
Mhm.
the big picture understanding of where we're going. With my children, where I'm going is I'm helping them live a life on their own without me.
Right.
And then with my parents, I am helping them get back to where they came from. I'm just whatever language. I try not to use religious language because everybody else has a different perspective.
Sure.
We want to make it as general as possible so everybody can see themselves. But
Right.
so, it's, and also the most obvious, like we're doing right now, let's talk about it. That's why I loved the email from the two of you. Cause you're like, we talk about these things. I'm like, yes, let's talk about death. Let's talk about caregiving. Let's talk about pain. Let's share our struggles with each other.
Sure.
Let's not do this alone. That's the worst. Cause then you're just in your head the whole time.
Right.
So I'm just really grateful for this conversation and what the two of you do, because we can't do it alone. We have to do it with each other.
Yeah, exactly. One last thing that I want to kind of touch on is, so especially in the last years of your mom's life, you had to be there a lot, it sounds like. And did she live locally near you?
She did. I live in Elmhurst, Illinois, outside of Chicago, and she lived about 30 minutes further west. And then my sister lived 5 minutes from her. So my sister was always emergency contact, get over there right away. And then I would be there 2 or 3 times a week.
I'm curious about the juggling with your girls while you're doing that. Because that's one thing, as I was going through and I was gone every day, my youngest daughter was like, you haven't been here, you're not here. And
separation anxiety kind
and
of
the balancing act. To me, that's kind of the real challenging part.
Yes. I would say that, gosh, there's so many different levels of this because again, I did this when they were so little too.
Right.
And so it's like, but I'll just give the most current version of it is that I had to make decisions about, in the end, my most important work, because my mom was in a care facility, I always deferred to my kids.
Mm.
Now, when I say that, I didn't have to do that much. There were I remember one time I was in charge of my mom for the day and I was taking her to get her haircut, go to lunch. And I remember my youngest daughter had a lot going on and it was we were dealing with things with the school. It was just a lot. And I remember driving to go pick up my mom for her haircut and I was crying and I knew my daughter needed me. And I literally pulled over to the side of the road and called my sister and said, I'm going to have to cancel this haircut. I can't take my mom to lunch. I have to go home. I have to do this first. And my sister, she's also a mother. She said, you know what? We have to have that boundary. Like this doesn't happen that much. Like, maybe 5% of the time I have to make a choice. And I also tried to bring my girls with me when I could. I didn't put it, I think if you were to ask them, they never felt like they were responsible for my parents in any way, but I would sometimes be like, let's go see grandma and then we'll go to lunch and then, we'll talk about it. So I tried to not make it 2 separate worlds.
Yeah.
As they got older, like especially my middle daughter, she's a senior and she has a lot going on. I would sometimes say, do you want to go? And she's like, Mom, I just can't. I'm like, that's fine. Like no guilt, no shame. Like this is not you need to go see your grandma. It was more like, this is family. This is what we do for each other. They know their mom takes care of her parents. That's what my children have learned. And so I try not to pit them against each other. Like, well, I have to do, it kind of had to be like when they were like, you should be here. I'm like, you're right. Like this is a lot. And for you to have to deal with me taking care of my mom and dad, this is a lot for you. And you know what? And that's sometimes then I'd have to make a choice and say, you know what, today I'm going to stay here. And you're right. And even that one time of doing that, then they realize sometimes they'd be like, no, go, you can go, but they just needed to hear that they're important too.
Yeah. To know that in that crisis or in that situation that you would still be there for them.
Because I really do believe I do have a responsibility for my parents, but my mom was safe where she was.
Right.
If she was living in my house or living alone and I had to go make sure she ate, that's a different story. But really what I was doing was caregiving from that emotional place, like making sure she got around and out and taken care of and doctor's appointments. But my daughter, she's growing and learning and doesn't have the prefrontal cortex yet to understand that all of that rational thinking. Exactly. She's just like, am I loved? Am I cared for? So I would have to defer to her. But again, for everybody listening to that sounds overwhelming. It doesn't happen that often. I mean, and especially if we start to if they recognize we're deferring to them, they don't ask for it as much. I mean, human beings are really interesting. They just want to know, do you hear me? Do you see me? Do you value me? Right. And if we show them that, they're like, okay, I'm good for a little bit. Then they need it again,
Yeah. I know one day my daughter, my youngest, came with me to the hospital and she went to say hello to her grandfather, but the room overwhelmed her. And so there was a lobby around the corner and she had her school books with her and she sat in the lobby and I knew how to check on her and stepped out. And so, yeah, it's the balancing act. And like you said, talking about it is so important. And that's why we're here. And that's why we're talking to you. Yes. And I want to give you the opportunity to share any additional information about Zen Parenting Radio and how people can connect with you even more. And
so my website, our website, because my business is obviously with my husband Todd and I do Zen Parenting Radio, zenparentingradio.com. Very easy place to find us. The big offerings that I would share is that we have something called Team Zen, which is our virtual community. Mm-hmm. It's our only really thing that you pay for, because obviously everything else we do is free, but Team Zen is it's a community of people who listen to the show, are interested in, all these things we're talking about here. And it's not just us offering support, it's the community offering support. And there's a lot of different, aspects to it. We have our own app. We have all the, I'm offering another class about taking care of our children or taking care of our girls. It's just like this place where we can kind of get behind the curtain and be more interactive with people who listen. Right. And then of course, my book, all the things I write, I also offer a weekly newsletter called Zen Parenting Moment, where I write something and share. And that's, thank you.
Yeah, we joined, we got.
Good. I'm so glad.
We joined,
Team Zen.
I
saw your name. I was like, I know Don and Gina.
I was telling Don about it. I was very excited. I'm like, we really need to join this. And I was checking it out today. And I love that idea of community. Don and I were trying to grow a similar thing
with the Parent Club,
with the communication skills classes, because it helps to lean on other people. It's like when we do these classes for parents about communication with kids, them hearing from another parent dealing with a similar situation, it gives you validation that, okay, I'm not screwing up my kids. I don't have kids who are whatever, that this is just normal part of parenting, normal part of these processes. So it's been wonderful to talk with you today about Zen parenting and about this topic of juggling our children and our aging parents.
With sandwich generation, yeah.
Yes, being sandwiched in the middle of it all and trying to make sense of it all.
So we really thank you for being part of this. It was a joy to meet you and to hear you have such great information and stories and everything.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Well, like I said, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate what you're talking about. I think we need to talk about it more. And just thank you for the work you do too.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that's our podcast for today. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you like what you've heard, you can learn more about Cathy and Zen Parenting and also our parenting coaching program or our next workshop at focusedhealthyfamily.com. Or you can follow us on Facebook at Focused Healthy Family, Instagram at Gina at Focused Healthy Family. And you'll find both our blog and our podcast on our website. Also check in we have our Tuesday tips for parents. You want to do that?
And remember, how we speak to our children today shapes their future.